There are family relationships that are going to be shocked by this because we have spent decades looking after each other's parents, and we've spent decades looking after our children. And suddenly for grandma and grandpa to get divorced, or for mom and dad to get divorced, is shocking. It was a difficult argument to make when you stand by somebody's side for 30 years, through thick and thin, and through all the challenges. You have to wonder, is this financial exploitation? When there are mental health issues, the propensity to dissipate wealth is great. We do it with doctors. We go for an annual checkup, and if we have a funny ailment or ache or pain, we give the doctor's office a call and say, what do you think? Do it with your lawyer. When you get to talk about that and have these relationships with people while meeting your children's needs, your career needs, your family needs, your own needs, and your charitable interest in repairing the world, then that's the joy of it, is tying it together like poetry.
This is The Litigator's Edge, the podcast where smart strategy, practical innovation, and real-world experience come together to move litigation forward. Each week, we sit down with attorneys, legal tech leaders, and trusted advisors who are rethinking how great legal work gets done. You'll hear how law firms are building a competitive advantage. These conversations are grounded, insightful, and designed to help you refine how you work and how you win. Here is your host, Aniket Sawant.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode of The Litigator's Edge, the podcast where innovative attorneys reveal the strategies that have transformed their legal practice. My name is Aniket Sawant, and I'm co-founder and CEO of Threadeo. My guest today is a powerhouse in the world of private litigation, known for commanding the difficult intersection where matrimonial law, high-stakes trust disputes, and mental health crises collide. She is a partner and chair of Fiduciary litigation at Rubin Rudman, where she serves as a strategic advisor to high net worth individuals and family offices. Recognized as a trailblazer by the National Law Journal and a top woman of law, she is the attorney that families call when their legacy, wealth, and personal dignity are on the line. It's my pleasure to welcome Lisa Cukier to the podcast. Welcome, Lisa, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
It's my pleasure, Lisa, and my privilege to have you here. Lisa, as you know, I always like to start by asking each of my guests to share either a fun fact about themselves or a cringe joke. Which will it be for you, and what is it?
I have a wonderful cringe joke, but what I think I'm going to do is push it towards the end of the presentation because it's going to ring a bell at the end of the presentation, and it's going to be a great way to wrap it up, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. I cannot wait. We've had multiple episodes. We've never had the cringe joke at the end, and I'm looking forward to it. So thank you.
Terrific. Thank you.
So with that, let me move to my next question, which is that I truly believe that every attorney who makes the time to be on this podcast is a superhero, and every superhero has an origin story. And I would love to learn yours.
Thank you. So I thought initially when I was a youngster that I would be a social worker. And my plan was to be a social worker. And I started studying political science and human services and sociology. And I was going to go, after my bachelor's degree, I was going to go study social work and get a master's and maybe a PhD in social work. And I thought that my career was going to be set navigating systems for individuals and families in the world. And I started along that path and started practicing in the area of geriatric and psychiatric social work while I was in college. And two of my professors, independently and separately, said to me, don't do it. Don't go there. They both said, go to law school. You're going to like it more and you're going to appreciate it later. And I never for a day had thought of ever going to law school. It wasn't even on my radar. And I looked into it. I took the LSAT, which is the admission exam. I did fine. I applied. I got in. It was never on my radar. I went to law school. It was okay. I did fine. And I found my calling. They were absolutely right. So I went from geriatric and psychiatric social work with a bachelor's degree to practicing law. And the irony is that I navigate systems for individuals and families every day of my life. And I love what I do. I get to blend social work and law for the benefit of families and individuals. And so I'm doing exactly what I set out to do as a kid, but I'm doing it now as a lawyer and not as a social worker.
That's amazing. That's such a beautiful story, and so well told as well. So thank you for sharing that, Lisa. Going back to your early career, you started with social work, and you started your career, excuse me, as regional counsel for the departments of mental health and so forth. And that was your sort of tour of duty in public service. How did those early years in the trenches of public service sort of shape the way that you now handle the matters that you do and help the families that you do?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. I really enjoyed public service. I was defending state agencies. I was not representing individuals, and so it was a more defensive role where I was looking after the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and defending the commissioners of state agencies, including what was then called Department of Mental Retardation. It's now known as DDS, Department of Developmental Services. And I prosecuted disabled person abuse cases for the Disabled Person Protection Commission in Massachusetts with a special assignment from the then Attorney General. And I also served as counsel for the Department of Mental Health. And I loved the work representing the Commonwealth and serving as a lawyer for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It was great, fun, interesting work, and it was meaningful. It was valuable. Although I was representing the Commonwealth, I was making lives better, both for the individual and families. The work after 9/11 here in the United States, I started to think differently about it. I felt that I was doing the same thing over and over and over, representing the Commonwealth. And I started to get itchy to do more. I think that 9/11 spoke to me and made me think, what am I doing with my career? What am I doing with my life? What do I want? It was a little game changing for me in the way that I think the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, was game changing for individuals. It makes you stop and think, what am I doing and what do I want for the future? And as I was just having those thoughts, without a resume, I was headhunted by a lawyer who I had great respect for and who ended up becoming a law partner of mine for 22 years. He brought me into the firm and I worked with him for 22 years until, unfortunately, the firm closed its doors. It shuttered its doors, not for any reason having to do with the health of the firm. It was a superbly well-run firm, and quite healthy and financially extraordinarily well, doing quite well financially. It just ended its days for other reasons. But we were together as law partners for 22 years. And it was just a great trajectory and a lot of fun. And that's when I expanded out of government service and into representing families and individuals directly, and in particular, families of wealth. And so the matters that I handled became high asset matrimonial law, service as concierge trustee, service as conservator to manage assets, to keep people safe in the community, allow elders to age in place or to place them in very good programs and nursing programs, and to represent families where they have individuals in the family who have addiction or substance abuse or who have diminishing capacity. I represent trusts and businesses, family businesses in particular, in order to keep lines of wealth intact and not subject to various transitional issues that can injure businesses and trusts and family assets.
Understood. Thank you again for sharing that narrative. That was, again, a very lucid way of describing your career journey, and I appreciate you sharing that with me. If I take a step back and look at sort of what you're doing, the work that you're doing today, and sort of try to connect it to the mental health world that you were in, for somebody who may not be as knowledgeable or as experienced as you in the work that you do, what do you think is the connection between mental health and the interests of wealthy families?
So individuals who have wealth often, not always, but often have trust interests or assets out there. And when there are mental health issues, the propensity to dissipate wealth is great. Sometimes individuals are subject to exploitation by third parties. They become vulnerable, or they potentially have mania, and the manifestations of the mania, the manic behavior can sometimes cause a dissipation of family wealth. Sometimes individuals who have mental health issues are in positions of fiduciary power. They may be the trustee themselves, not the beneficiary of the trust, and the trustee's in charge of monitoring the family wealth. And if that person has mental health issues or a diminishment of capacity that may not be related to what we think of as traditional mental health, but maybe a dementia, maybe Alzheimer's, maybe another type of illness, of Parkinson's, or some kind of a compromising situation that may cause a dissipation of wealth, families will come to me to ask me for solutions to protect the family member, protect the family, protect the wealth, and keep things intact.
Understood. Thank you for sharing that. You mentioned in your previous narrative, Lisa, a couple of different roles that you have played and continue to play for the various families and individuals that you represent. And one of those roles was concierge trusteeship. Can you explain what that means? How does that relate to the work that you do? And how did you even get into developing this new role?
Thank you. I would love to talk about that. Typically, lawyers or other professionals who serve as trustee, typically they don't get heavily involved. They simply manage the money. They get a request for distribution. They either distribute it or ask questions and decide whether or not to distribute it. They either invest it themselves or they have a professional, a financial professional, do the investing. Either they're custodians of the wealth or they will have a custodian, an institutional custodian. Whereas when you have a family trustee, the family member knows the beneficiaries and knows the family paradigms and knows what to do as trustee in a different way than a professional would. So what I do as a professional trustee is I have the assets managed by a wealth manager, somebody, not me, somebody who really knows finance. And I get very involved with the family. I learn the family paradigms, the family history. I meet with my clients often. We will meet in a way that is not highly structured, such as in an office. We might meet for a cup of coffee and a pastry. We might meet for a meal, or we'll do an activity together. And I get to know my clients. I get to know the beneficiaries, the trustees, if there's other trustees besides me, such as family office trustees. And sometimes I co-trustee with a family member. But I'm able to really learn what my clients need, what the family needs, and bring it together. During the pandemic, for example, made sure that if somebody needed a Thanksgiving meal dropped off in November of 2020 on their doorstep, I had that there. If somebody needed a Seder plate in April of 2020, I had that there. If somebody needed a birthday party with a group of family members by Zoom, I coordinated that, and I had balloons sent and mini cupcakes and flowers. And to this day, I'll send flowers. And sometimes I'll have some of my team go out and celebrate a birthday party with somebody. And so we really handle the work in a very concierge way, whatever the client needs or wants. Moments before I got on this podcast today, I was asked to purchase a car for one of my clients who no longer should be driving. And I questioned that. Why would I purchase a car? And well, I think we're going to get drivers for this client of mine and drive him around so that he can really have enrichment in his world and engagement in the community, and have somebody take him banking so he can do it himself, have somebody take him shopping so he can do it himself, have somebody take him to opera, take him to museums, and take him out for a muffin and a cup of coffee, whatever it is that brings him joy. And in a car, that's his. That's a luxury car that my drivers will drive for him. So and I will hire out the drivers. I'll outsource a lot of the work because nobody wants to pay a lawyer for it because it's really not legal work. But I will be the person in charge of making sure that an individual's life is as absolutely comfortable as possible. And if that individual ends up at some point in the hospital or there's an issue, I will notify family and I'll make sure, no matter what time of day or night, weekend, holiday, whatever it is, that not only can I be reached on my cell at any time of day or night, but that I can reach others and let them know what's going on so that there's a lot of communication. Nobody ever feels that I'm just in my office and I'm just a unknown trustee. I get to know the family and the individual.
That's incredible. So it's a very high touch, very empathetic, very sort of almost 360-degree approach. And I would imagine that especially during the dark days of the pandemic, the deeds and the actions that you did for your clients, I'm sure that they have not forgotten them. So kudos to you for doing all of those things. That's amazing. You mentioned a couple of other roles that you play, Lisa. Can you maybe share what you do in those roles as well?
Yes, so I serve as private adjudicator and special master. So a private adjudicator is a person, often a lawyer or a retired judge or a mediator, who is trained and has some expertise and who's asked to resolve issues privately outside of court. Now, if the case is court involved or if there needs to be eventually a court adjudication, then the lawyers would go to court. The lawyers who are handling the case and representing the parties would go to court and ask the court to permit the decision of a private adjudicator to control. And then you've got to discuss, will there be appeal rights or not? Will there be an opportunity to weigh in and potentially unwind what the private adjudicator will do? So there's a lot of discussion that goes on. There has to be some negotiation of this by everybody so that everybody's comfortable, everybody's on board. And if the parties have established boundaries and rules for private adjudication and the judge who's responsible for the case agrees, then I can actually adjudicate it privately, draft up an order, and provide that to the judge, asking the judge to allow it. And that's how it's done. So I often will have attorneys who know my style and know that I will spend time listening to to their clients, listening to the parties before me in a private adjudication scenario, a forum. And I listen not just to the words, but to what's behind the words and the bylines and what's really going on. Empathy and intuition are part of what I bring to this work. And I like to predict and anticipate and be creative. And it all starts with listening for things, listening for the unspoken word, things that you do not hear. And then sometimes lawyers will bring a case to me. Perhaps it's a case where the parents can't decide who gets to see the children when, but they also don't want to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars litigating it, which very often causes pain for the children because the children somehow know that their parents are fighting over them. And that's not good for children. Children shouldn't feel that they are responsible for their parents' pain and discord over them. Not a healthy way to go. And so by sending this to a private adjudicator or a mediator, a conciliator, you're able to get a decision by somebody who will spend more time than the court has the luxury to spend, and time that's not as expensive as positioning this in front of a judge. And then your private adjudicator can make some orders and ask the court to accept them. With a special master, that is a court appointment where the court will literally, sometimes counsel won't even ask the judge. The judge tells counsel before them, I'm appointing a special master. I had one that involved a very wealthy gentleman who owned a very significant business that we all know, and I just can't say the name out loud, but he had family litigation. His children and grandchildren were fighting over his assets, and he was still alive at the time, but he was quite aged. And the court said, enough. I'm appointing a special master. I want this to go before Lisa to listen in and really learn more about it, delve in, and make some decisions. But when you're appointed as a special master under Massachusetts law, there's a mechanism to allow the master to issue a decision, and then both sides have a set number of days to weigh in and ask for alterations in my order. And I like that because then I can hear what the other sides are thinking and reading in my order, and I can consider whether the new issues they've raised should weigh in or whether I'm sticking to my guns. I got it right the first time. It's almost like a reconsideration request. And so, but I like giving everybody an opportunity to weigh in within a set number of days so that I can hear what's on a little more, what's on your mind when you see where I'm going with this. And then maybe I tweak my order or not, but then I file it with the court and it's up to the judge to make a decision. So those are different roles that I serve. Sometimes I'll serve as what's called a guardian ad litem, where the court has asked me to investigate and report back with my recommendations. And I'm thankful for that role, any of these roles. It means that the judges trust my take on this. And typically these are high stakes, typically high asset cases, not always high asset, but typically they're high stakes. Either they are family asset litigation or matrimonial law. And I am thankful that the courts want to hear my recommendations on this.
That's fantastic, Lisa. For me, the through line as you were sharing all of the roles that you continue to play was one of obviously capability and competence and skills and experience, but also trust and empathy, and that's amazing that you have that combination of qualities which enables you to take on these roles and execute them so well. So thank you for sharing that. Going to like a specific case, obviously without going into the details or of the individuals involved, but I understand that you successfully litigated a case once which involved a quote unquote romantic interloper who exploited an elderly client, and I would imagine that this is a scenario that unfortunately is becoming more and more common. So again, without going into the details, can you maybe take us a little bit into what happened there and what resolution you drove that matter towards?
It happens so much. It is a major part of my practice. Absolutely. I am asked to represent family members typically. Sometimes I'm asked to represent a spouse. But in these cases, a aging individual is being influenced by a person who portrays themselves as a romantic interest. And very often the elder is dependent on this individual or feels a sense of late life desperation for relationship. Potentially they feel vulnerable in the world and need this person, or they perhaps are divorced or widowed and they really want a companion, or any number of reasons why this may happen. But ultimately, there are individuals who will insinuate themselves into the assets and estate plans of aging individuals. And so I have been asked many times, typically by adult children of an aging individual who's being influenced, to represent them in order to put an end to the exercise of undue influence and financial exploitation of their aging relative or parent. It happens all the time. I get referrals like this very frequently. And so I do represent individuals and families to protect against a financial exploitation. Sometimes I'm asked by a new spouse, sometimes a relatively new spouse, and maybe it's new as in a couple of weeks, a couple of months. One time it was a second spouse that had been married for 30 years to the aging individual and who had been there through thick and thin. It was a second spouse in the aging individual's life. He'd been remarried to her, but it was 30 years ago. And the adult children were alleging that she had influenced him as he was aging, but they were together for 30 years. It was a difficult argument to make when you stand by somebody's side for 30 years through thick and thin and through all the challenges that marriages are confronted with. You have to wonder, is this financial exploitation, or is this a person, an elderly person saying, thank you, 30 years by my side, and I'm aging, and it's not pretty. What's going on in my body and in my life and in our home is not pretty, and you're still taking such good care of me. I want to make sure to take care of you because I'm not long in this world. And so sometimes it's the spouse, the new spouse, whether it's a few days of marriage or a few months, a few years, or a lot of years. So it's not always representing the adult children. But what happens with blended families that's very unique to blended families is that there are various family members from prior family incarnations and familial relationships, and it creates expectation, senses of entitlement, either correctly or incorrectly, but it exists. There become expectations and obligations. Sometimes those are expectations and obligations that are legally set by statute. And sometimes they're expectations and obligations that we feel inside of us that have no legal basis whatsoever. They're just social. And what it does is it causes litigation potentially later in life when assets start moving, the house gets transferred to somebody, and somebody else says, this does not make sense to me. And so it turns into litigation often, or at least a need for negotiation and resolution of problems.
That makes a lot of sense. Going back to, or maybe pulling at a thread that you referenced a couple of minutes ago, Lisa. So you mentioned the case of the second spouse who was married for 30 years to this individual. The opposite of that. So I understand that you also handle a lot of quote unquote gray divorce. So couples splitting up later in life after decades of building wealth. Can you take us into what constitutes a gray divorce? What are some of the trends that you're seeing? How it differs from, say, a standard dissolution, and just generally what are you seeing in that space?
Sure. So I segment divorces into three segments. It's the relatively new marriage earlier in life with little kids, and that's one divorce. And then there's gray divorce, which actually is a larger segment of our population than most people, I think, really want to include themselves in, because it's hard to consider yourself gray when you've got a head of non-gray hair. But the fact of the matter is, gray divorce, which is midlife divorce, really starts in the late 40s and early 50s when the kids are getting a little older. They're not little kids anymore. Perhaps they've graduated from high school. Perhaps they've graduated from college. Perhaps there's grandchildren in the picture. But this is at a point when people are between about 45 and 70 years of age. And that's when a lot of divorces happen. It happens at a time when the kids are starting to graduate. There's the couple starts to think about what's going to happen when I'm empty nesting. And suddenly people start thinking about their next chapter, what it looks like. Do they know their spouse anymore? Have they grown apart? Do they have romance? Do they have intimacy? Do they have love? And are they meant to be together forever? And as the kids start growing up and getting older, and as careers mature and we mature, and various twists and turns and forces push and pull on marriage, which just naturally happens, sometimes marriages don't survive. And so at this age range between 45 and 65, we are at our income earning years. We are receiving inheritances. We are receiving trust distributions, and we have businesses that are paying out distributions, or businesses that are really finally looking like they're going to go somewhere, because in our 20s and 30s, they didn't look too good. But now in our 40s and 50s and 60s, and especially 70s, they're looking really good. And so at this point, divorce at this time is typically a wealthier divorce. It's a typically higher stakes financial divorce. And it also means that there are family relationships that are going to be shocked by this, because we have spent decades looking after each other's parents, and we've spent decades looking after our children and our grandchildren. And suddenly for grandma and grandpa to get divorced, or for mom and dad, when we're adults, for mom and dad to get divorced is shocking. Or or for the families, for the older generations to look down and say, oh my gosh, they're getting divorced, our son and daughter-in-law, or our daughter and son-in-law, or daughter and daughter-in-law, son and son-in-law getting divorced. It's shocking to people. And because we have established such significant relationships with family, these divorces have to be handled with great finesse, with care, and with grace. And they're also very highly tactical and strategic, because you're trying to keep bloodlines of wealth in one line of the family, but you have a relationship with the outgoing in-law. And so they're challenging cases, but they're very fun, and they can be handled with grace and finesse and without tainting the long term. These are typically long-term marriages, without tainting those long-term marriages, and to the extent possible, keeping family relationships preserved despite the pain.
Got it. Thank you for sharing that, Lisa. On that note, as I was reflecting on what you were sharing or what you were saying, so much of the work that you do has such a strong human element to it, right? Just understanding the various dynamics, building trust, building empathy, not just between you and your client, but also among the various individuals or family bloodlines, as you mentioned, involved. But there's also sort of a non-human, meaning technological side to this, in terms of when you're dealing with evidence, capacity evaluations, medical records, family communication. So what role do you see, especially in this day and age, for technology and specifically AI, which is on everybody's minds, in the work that you do as it relates to these pieces of evidence, or just in general in the work that you do?
Yes, AI is so important right now. I'm so glad you asked this. It's so important right now. It can be a great help. It can be a huge advantage, and it can also be harmful and potentially problematic. And I'll explain both. So, right now, I can take a brief that I have used in a prior case that cites to statutes and cites to case law, or perhaps I could use a article that I've written, or a chapter. I write legal chapters, practice chapters that other lawyers use to study from when they want to learn a practice area. So I could take a chapter of mine and I can upload it into an AI system. And we have special, as lawyers, we have special ones just so that they're cleansed. The public does not have access to this. So you don't get public opinion in there. It's untainted, it's sanitized, and it's pure. And I can throw it in and upload data there, and it will tell me which cases are still good law, which are not, which have been ever so slightly modified, and how so, and how it's been treated by the courts for the ensuing years. And I can get a list of all the newest cases that are the latest and greatest that are on point. So it will give me superb legal research that is really driven by the law itself and not by public opinion, because I never want the risk is that somebody somewhere has interpreted something and it finds its way into AI. And that's a risk. You don't want to just get on any of these typical publicly available drivers and search engines for AI if you're practicing law. I do know in Massachusetts, I'm a Massachusetts lawyer, so I only know Massachusetts, but I know of situations where lawyers have put stuff into these general public chat type of search engines for AI and come up with case names that do not exist, that are just called hallucinations, or that are based on a conflation of data that's out there on the general internet that has been created by lay people and non-lawyers, or even lawyers, that is just plain wrong and incorrect, or mythological. It's like myths. There's a lot of myths about the law, and that exists. So the risk here, I do have clients who I might share pleadings with a client and they get back to me saying, last night I researched it on AI and this is what I learned. And some of it may be accurate. Some of what I hear reflected back from my client may be accurate. And I can say, yes, that is what it means. I'm glad you did your research. But then I can see that some of it is not accurate. Also, judges have have equitable powers. They can put their own heart and soul into a case, and they can be a little subjective in their application of the law to the particular facts of your case. And every little fact changes the outcome. And clients don't necessarily appreciate that. So what they don't know is how the judge rules on this case, and they don't know how one little different fact might have a huge outcome. You've heard of the butterfly who flaps his wings in one jurisdiction and it creates a tornado in another. So that's what happens here. And so with AI, the risk is that clients will misunderstand or be misinformed. And then we have to dispel those incorrect notions. And we spend time doing that. And lawyers bill by the minute. And so if we're spending time correcting your understanding of the law or letting you know how this judge rules on this particular issue with those specific facts, then you're spending all this money to have somebody correct your research that you did overnight. And you're wondering, I'm not seeing anything for this money. Like there's no product. I'm not winning the case on this. I'm just learning that I was wrong, and that doesn't feel good. So it actually has a tricky impact on the lawyer-client relationship, but it also has some value because clients do come back to me saying, oh, I understand what that motion's about now. And to some extent, I can say, good work.
That's great. No, thank you for sharing that sort of the nuance in terms of where it's beneficial, such as you mentioned right now, enabling the clients to understand for themselves without sort of making too much of a demand on your time, which then comes back to them in the form of billings, versus when it's taken too far, where now you're spending, instead of helping them win the case, you're spending all those hours helping them understand what was right and wrong, or what was accurate and inaccurate in their little research experiment. So no, that's such a nuanced take. Lisa, this has been a great conversation. Just a couple of quick questions to close us out here. So outside of the roles that you mentioned you play, your bio talks about your philanthropic life. So you host fundraisers, you quote unquote entertain with impact. And so, in your opinion, how important has the social capital that you've inevitably built through the work that you do, how impactful has that been to your essentially your success in your professional career? And what advice would you give to young lawyers who are maybe looking up or listening to this episode and wondering how they can sort of follow in your footsteps?
So it has been very impactful in my career. Keep in mind, and whoever's listening also knows, I am very relationship driven. And that's where my work begins, and I carry it through. And so with relationship comes contact, communication, and really getting to know people very well. And I take it very seriously. I love life. I love people. I love listening and learning. I'm just a student of it, and I'll never tire of it. So if I can try to integrate, and this is important for young lawyers and young professionals anywhere, when you're young, you're starting to have kids, you're starting to build your career, you need to make connections, you need to develop a network, and you need to move your life in the direction you want it to go. And you can't do it completely alone. And there's only, as far as I know, 24 hours in a day. I try to stretch it into 28 hours in a day, and I've been failing that miserably ever since I started. So with 24 hours in the day, some of which you need for sleep, unfortunately, I hate to sleep, but you have to sometimes. And so with that, eating into some of your beautiful hours in the day, you've got to integrate. You've got to make sure that you are meeting your children's needs, meeting your career's needs, meeting your spouse's needs, your family member needs, your own needs, and your career needs. And the only way to really fit it into a day is to integrate. So if you, as a young professional, belong to a church or a temple or a philanthropic organization, or you sit on a board, or you're really interested in, let's just say, disability issues, or you're interested in the homeless, or you're interested in saving wild-caught tuna and whatever it might be, whatever good work you want to do that's going to give you a sense of fulfillment and repairing the world around you, which I think is a very important thing to do in addition to everything else we're doing. If you can bring it together by hosting or attending events that are philanthropic or that meet all those needs, where you are potentially inviting other parents of little children to a particular event that sponsors a charity that you're interested in, and you all have time to talk about your lives, your work, your careers, what drives you, what you love, what you hate, what makes life worth living. Uh, when you get to talk about that and have these relationships with people while meeting your children's needs, your career needs, your family needs, your own needs, and your charitable interest in repairing the world to the extent that you can in your short time on this planet, then that's the joy of it, is tying it together like poetry. So I do host at my house, and I do try to have a charitable component to it. I always try to have a little bit of pro bono work, a little bit of charity work, whatever I can do to try to do my part before my day's over. And it brings it together, and my career is enhanced by it because I make connections, and that turns into client referrals, and that turns into productivity metrics at my firm, which turns into doing well as a lawyer.
That's great. That's such a wonderful sort of synthesis of how you sort of apportion your day. And instead of compartmentalizing it, you, as you mentioned, you integrate it. And then that's fulfilling to you. And that helps you achieve, I dare say, multiple objectives simultaneously. Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Okay, Lisa, this has been great. So now we'll go back to the very first question that I asked you, which is, what is that cringe joke? Could you please share it with us?
I'm going to share a joke. It's a cringe joke. It's my favorite, and I'm glad for all those who stayed with us for this presentation. Thank you for staying to the end. I'm going to reward you with the goofiest joke that I know. So my name is French. Cukier is IER is the last three letters, and so it's a French name. And I have a joke that I will tell in English, but it's a French joke. So Quasimodo was up in the steeple of the church, and he used to ring the bell in the most beautiful way. And when he rang it, everybody in the village would hear the bell, and they set their lifestyle around the timing of the ringing of the bell and the beautiful music. It was melodious, and people lived by it. One day, Quasimodo goes to the doctor. He's just not feeling well, and he hasn't been feeling well for a while. And the doctor says to Quasimodo, you need to take a break. You are just ringing that bell too often, too much. Your health has declined, and you have a condition right now that's going to need bed rest. No more ringing the bell for you for a good long time. And Quasimodo says, no, it's got to be me. Nobody can do this like me. Nobody can replace me. Doctor, don't make me be on bed rest. And the doctor says, you must be on bed rest. I'm ordering it. So Quasimodo figures, okay, I'm going to have to interview people for my job on a temporary basis. I don't know where I'm going to find people. I'm going to advertise far and wide, and I'm an affirmative action employer, and I'm going to go to every corner of the earth. I'm all about diversity, and I'm going to find the right person. So one of the candidates for the job of ringing the bell during his episode of bed rest is very disabled, and this person has no arms and no legs. And Quasimodo can't believe it's true that he could possibly ring the bell. How is this person going to ring the bell? But he figures, I'm going to just see. I'm going to test this out. And he says to this individual, the candidate for the job, give it a shot. Let me hear you ring the bell. And this guy takes a rolling start, and he rolls, and boom, he hits that bell. And it lets out this most magnifique sound. And the sound reverberates throughout the village in France. And all the people come out of their doors to see, who is this? How did this bell ring like that? We've never quite heard it with such melody before. And they all come out to look. And Quasimodo says, oh my goodness, I can't believe I even doubted you. Do it again. I want to hear it. Second time's a charm. And so this guy rolls, and rolls, hits the bell again. It lets out the same exquisite sound. And everybody is listening. They want to hear more. But this time, from the momentum of his roll, and hitting the bell, he's propelled backwards, and he falls off the steeple. And down he rolls and falls, splat to the ground. and the French police, the gendarmes, come out, and the villagers circle around, and everybody looks, and they look at this person with no arms and no legs, and the police say, "Who is this man?" And you hear Quasimodo yell down, "I don't know, but his face sure rings a bell."
Oh my God. Wow. That is quite something.
I should apologize. And that is true. That's a cringe.
That's the most eloquent cringe joke I've ever heard, I think. So that thank you for sharing that, Lisa. Okay, final question for you. Is there a question that I should have asked you, but I didn't?
Oh, yes, there is one thing. So I find that clients come to me when it's too late. And if there's one thing that I want to impart before I go, besides corny jokes, is that when people feel that their marriage is challenging, or when people feel that their family relationship is challenging, or that asset structures are unsafe, or when they know that they have a transition ahead, the future death of somebody, a potential disability, a potential addiction issue, a mental health issue, anything, discord among business owners, discord among trustees, whenever you feel that there is something that you should discuss with counsel, go hire counsel. You don't have to tell anybody. You can hire a person privately. The lawyer can be in the shadows just to advise you. It's good to be able to pick up the phone and call your lawyer to get advice from moment to moment. We do that with therapists. We have a therapist every now and then, and we may call them 10 years later and say, "Do you remember me from 10 years ago? I have something I want to talk about. Can I make time for a 45-minute session with you?" And we do that with our financial advisors. We do that with our personal trainers. I haven't worked out in a while. Can I bring you back in to give me a new gym routine? Do it with your lawyer. We do it with doctors. We go for an annual checkup, and if we have a funny ailment or ache or pain, we give the doctor's office a call and say, "What do you think?" Do it with your lawyer. Everybody needs to have somebody on speed dial, if you will, just proverbially speaking, somebody to call for advice. And my favorite cases are those where I have been advising people for years and nothing bad happens because I've been navigating them through all kinds of potential challenges for a long enough time that we can keep a person out of trouble. Or if trouble's afoot, then I can make game-changing, needle-moving changes right away on the early side so that the outcome at the other end is better than it would have been had I not been involved from the start.
That's great advice, and I'm sure that's something that I think is true for all of us, regardless of practice or demographic. So thank you so much for sharing that, Lisa. This has been a wonderful conversation. I certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience will as well. So thank you so much again for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was fun.
The Litigator's Edge podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.